Splash. Scalding coffee. Thrown right into her face. No warning. No reason. Just because she's black. The officer smirked. Filing a report? Or just craving attention, sweetheart? The whole room froze. No one stepped in. No one dared. She didn't scream. Didn't back down. Just said one sentence. Thank you for showing me how you treat civilians here. And then she turned around. Not to retreat, but to return. With real power. Because the woman he just humiliated was a newly appointed police chief of Briarfield. Which state are you in? If that had been your mother, what would you have done? Stay with us, because this story doesn't end in silence. Steam rose from the coffee mug, freshly poured from the machine behind the duty desk. Officer Shane Kershaw gripped it like it was power itself, with arrogance, laziness, and total disregard for anyone but himself. He swaggered back to his desk, dropped into an old swivel chair that groaned under his weight. His khaki uniform was wrinkled. His nameplate gleamed on the left side of his chest. But his attitude, more like a gatekeeper from a forgotten war zone, used to giving orders, not serving. The front door of the Briarfield Police Division swung open. A black woman walked in. Her stride was calm. A charcoal blue shirt and fitted jeans framed her poised figure. Her long hair was tied neatly back. Her eyes didn't challenge, but they didn't shrink either. What they held was quiet dignity. Naomi Ellison, 40 years old. But today, she wasn't here as a police chief. Today, she came to see how an ordinary black woman would be treated in a place like this. What do you need? Shane's voice shot out without looking up from his screen, still holding his steaming mug, still dripping in contempt. As if anyone out of uniform was just in the way, Naomi approached the counter. I'm here to report a theft, she said evenly. Not loud, not soft, each word measured, like it had been tailored in advance. Shane looked up. Cold, narrow eyes scanned her like a cheap item on a clearance shelf. Another one, huh? He scoffed, loud enough for nearby officers to hear. Let me guess, phone or wallet. Those never come back, sweetheart. Naomi didn't blink. I have the right to file a report. Shane stood, every movement calculated. A performance, not to help, but to assert dominance. He lifted his coffee, stepped in closer. A few officers glanced over. Some turned away immediately, pretending to be absorbed in screens and files. One officer, Kyle Merritt, a 29-year-old rookie, tensed up instinctively, but one look from Shane sent him backing off, silent like the rest of the room. You should know your place, Shane said, voice low, but loud enough. Here, we don't have time for petty nonsense, especially from your kind. No warning, no reason. Splash. Shane tilted his mug, and hot coffee splashed straight into Naomi's face. The sound of liquid hitting skin, fabric, then the cold tile floor, cut through the silence. One side of Naomi's face flushed red under the fluorescent lights. She stepped back, breathing fast. But her eyes never left Shane. No fury, no panic, just pure, quiet defiance. Loathing that didn't need to shout. Shane turned away, like he'd just taught someone a lesson. Sat back down. Started typing again. Go somewhere else, he muttered. Naomi wiped her face. Her collar soaked through with coffee. Around her, glances of pity darted in and out. But no one moved. No one spoke. No one dared. She inhaled slowly. Thank you, Naomi said softly, but her words cut through the thick air like a blade. For showing me how you treat civilians in this place. Then she turned and walked out of the room, leaving silence in her wake. Each footstep echoed, not like a victim's, but like someone who was coming back, with full authority. And Shane Kershaw, he had no idea that this morning he'd just thrown coffee. I'm Police Chief Naomi Ellison. Naomi Ellison walked straight down the west corridor of the Briarfield Police Division. The flickering fluorescent lights cast a pale shimmer over the drops of coffee trailing behind her on the tile floor. She said nothing, didn't look back, but her footsteps, firm, deliberate, told everyone the same thing. What just happened wasn't over. At the end of the hallway, a door opened. A middle-aged man stood waiting. White shirt tucked in, simple black tie, his eyes calm, steady. Wesley Drummond, 56, deputy chief, and the only person in the entire building who knew the true identity of the woman, just humiliated by one of his own. He tilted his head slightly when he saw the red mark on Naomi's cheek. "You all right, Naomi?" "I'll manage." Naomi loosened her ponytail, letting her long hair fall, covering part of the stinging skin. "You heard all of it, didn't you?" Wesley nodded, a quiet sadness in his eyes. "I wanted to step in, but you said to let it play out. And I needed to see it myself." Naomi looked at him, her voice low, steady. "Not because I doubted the reports, but because I wanted to understand just how deep the shadow runs in this place." She stepped into her private office, a room no one else in the precinct knew belonged to her. She splashed cold water on her face, cooling the blistering heat on her cheek. But there was one thing water couldn't wash away: the slow-burning rage, not for herself, but for every civilian who had ever walked into this place and been treated like they were beneath it. Naomi stared into the mirror, adjusted her collar, tightened her belt. When she stepped out, she was no longer the quiet woman at the front desk. She was Chief Naomi Ellison, officially appointed 2 weeks ago, and until now, still unknown to most of the force. "Prep the briefing room," she told Wesley. "I want to meet everyone." Immediately, 15 minutes later, the large conference room was packed. Chairs scraped against each other. Eyes flicked toward the door, expecting some upper-rank officer to walk in. Shane Kershaw sat in the far back corner, arms folded, expression blank, with a glint of smug defiance in his eyes. The door opened. Naomi stepped inside. The charcoal blouse was gone, now replaced with a full uniform of the chief of police. Polished badge on her chest, belt crisp, hair pinned neatly behind her head. No business cards, no name tags, just presence and the deadly silence that followed her in. "Good morning." Naomi stood at the front of the long table, her voice low and solid, like granite. "I assume you've all had quite the start to your day." A few coughs. Shane raised an eyebrow, not yet realizing. To avoid confusion, Naomi continued, "Allow me to reintroduce myself. I'm Naomi Ellison, and as of today, I am officially the chief of police for Briarfield Police Division." The room fell still. Shane froze. Even his breath stalled. "Officer Kershaw." Naomi turned toward him. Her voice didn't need volume, because no one dared interrupt. "I very much look forward to working with you in the days ahead." A few glances darted between officers, but no one laughed, because in that room, power had just shifted hands, not through force, not through rank, but through truth. The meeting room had barely emptied, but the atmosphere inside the Briarfield Police Division had already shifted, like a silent storm had swept through the building. No one spoke loudly. No one laughed. They filed out of the room like people who had just witnessed something unimaginable. A black woman standing tall before a room full of officers, declaring her authority, without trembling once. Shane Kershaw was different. He stayed seated long after the others stood. His eyes followed Naomi like she was an invader from another planet. One hand still rested on the armrest, but his knuckles had turned white. His lips were pressed tight, but no one needed to guess. Humiliation was boiling through his veins. "Who does she think she is?" Shane muttered, standing up. He wasn't talking to anyone in particular, but loud enough for someone to hear. He turned and stormed into hallway, his shoulders stiff, his steps heavy, like a man whose ego had just been slapped. In a building where he'd grown used applause. Near the exit desk, Kyle Merritt was quietly organizing files. Still young, 29, new to the force, not even a year in, clean-cut face, short brown hair, eyes that often looked down when he didn't know how to react. Just like this morning, Kyle was the first to see Shane throw hot coffee into Naomi's face. His fists had clenched, But then he let go, just like every other time. For Kyle, the fear didn't just come from Shane, but from the entire system of silence Shane had built. From the sidelong glances, the forced chuckles when someone got bullied, and the whispered warnings. Keep quiet if you want to keep your job. Kyle remembered Officer Chavez, the one who dared file a complaint against Shane for an unlawful use of force. The result? Chavez got transferred to a dead zone on the city's north edge, assigned to file reports on abandoned sites, stripped of patrol duty, radio silence, ignored by everyone. It wasn't a demotion. It was a career execution. No blood needed. So Kyle stayed quiet. Every time Shane insulted someone, every time he barked or bullied a civilian, Kyle told himself, I'm new. It's not my turn yet. I'll speak up when someone else does first. And then today, someone finally did. Someone who didn't shout, didn't pull rank, didn't threaten, just looked Shane dead in the eyes, and didn't blink. Kyle exhaled and looked up at the ceiling. In the distance, Shane passed his desk, shooting him a mocking glance, as if to say, she won't last. But this time, Kyle didn't look away. He met Shane's eyes, not with a challenge, but with something stronger. He didn't flinch. Behind the frosted glass of her office, Naomi Ellison watched them both. She didn't smile, but her eyes shifted just slightly, like she'd seen a crack open in the wall of silence that had stood for far too long. In Briarfield, fear passed from one officer to another, like a daily patrol sheet. But Naomi knew, to break it, you didn't need to shout. You just needed one person to stop lowering their head. And Kyle Merritt might be the first. 3 days after that first meeting, Briarfield Police Division still hadn't fully processed the shock. Named Naomi Ellison, the conversations around the coffee machine had turned quieter, more cautious. Polite nods now carried layers of guarded doubt. And in every glance, a single, unspoken question lingered. Is she really going to change the system? Naomi Ellison didn't waste time on whispers. That morning, at exactly 7:45, she stood outside the main conference room. This time, not just to show up, but to take action. Beside her stood Wesley Drummond, holding a thick stack of folders. On the cover, a freshly printed logo. SIT, Sentinel Integrity Task Force. You ready? He asked quietly. Naomi nodded, her eyes sweeping the room filled with officers, from veterans like Brady Kernell, seated near the back with arms crossed, to younger faces like Kyle Merritt, who now sat straighter, his eyes no longer avoiding hers. Naomi stepped to the podium, unfolding the reform plan in front of her. Thank you all for being here. Today isn't about blame. It's about building. Her voice was steady, warm, just loud enough to carry. We can't pretend everything's fine after what I witnessed in just 1 week. But I also believe no one in this room is beyond change. She opened the folder, flipped to the first page. My reform program consists of 3 key parts. 1, mandatory ethics retraining for everyone, from patrol officers to senior command. 2, an independent oversight unit, SIT, with full access to internal records and authority to investigate every citizen complaint. 3, a rebuilt civilian feedback system, publicly visible, with a streamlined response time of 10 days. Murmurs rippled through the room. I know some of you think integrity can't be taught, but I believe, like my grandmother used to say, ethics is a habit, and every habit begins with a small action. A light tap echoed across the room. Kyle had knocked once on the table, just once, but it made a few heads turn. Naomi gave a brief smile. Then she dropped the unexpected. The department will also launch a peer-based anonymous scoring system, she said, her voice now firmer, sharper. Each of you will evaluate your fellow officers every month based on 5 values: fairness, respect, transparency, community support, and integrity. In the back, Shane Kershaw's hand tightened on his chair. He clenched his jaw, but said nothing. In his mind, this wasn't a form anymore. This was war. Naomi locked eyes with the back row. No one gets to hide behind the badge anymore. You will be seen by your own peers. And if you're afraid of being seen for who you really are, you're free to leave, starting today. The room went silent, but this time, not from fear, from impact. Wesley moved down the aisles, placing a folder on each desk. Inside, a personal commitment form. No one was forced to sign, but once they did, they were choosing change. Naomi stepped down from the podium. No one clapped, but all eyes followed her. At Briarfield, the word integrity hadn't been spoken aloud in years. Today, it wasn't just spoken, it was measured. As for Shane Kershaw, he didn't sign, but he didn't leave either. He just sat there and started calculating. Less than 2 days after the reform briefing, Shane still hadn't recovered. To him, it felt less like a meeting and more like a verdict, one that hadn't been read yet. And he knew he was a defendant. That night, in his rundown apartment in Sycamore Crest, Shane sat hunched over his kitchen table. The yellow light cast long shadows from a chipped ceramic mug onto the wall. No more coffee in it, just a habit, something to hold. So he didn't smash something else. He muttered, "Morality scores? Who the hell does she think she is?" But what kept him up at night was the fact that Naomi didn't need to cuff him. She only needed to make the rest of the department start thinking differently. And that, to Shane, was more terrifying than a subpoena. Retaliation was inevitable. The next morning, Shane showed up at the Millhouse Diner, a quiet meet-up spot for a few of his loyal colleagues. There were quiet handshakes, nods of silent agreement, and the seat by the window was always waiting for him. At the table sat Brady Kernell, a veteran officer with too many years buried in case files and too little courage to challenge the system. Brady never fully trusted Shane, but he did believe in one thing: survival, and that's why he was here. "She's not just trying to reform," Shane said, stirring sugar into his coffee without drinking it. "She wants to expose." Brady glanced around the diner like he expected to be recorded. "So, what are you planning to do?" Shane leaned back, pulled an old folder from his coat, faded photocopies, some pages underlined in red. An old case. Victim's name, Marquis Lyle, arrested in 2011. Every piece of evidence? Accidentally lost. Brady squinted. "She handled this?" Shane nodded. "Back when she was an investigator in Northbridge sector. If this gets to the press, true or not, she'll be forced to explain." Brady hesitated. "Careful. This is deep water. She might have more backing than you think." Shane tilted his head, grinned coldly. "I've already spoken to Donovan Pike. He doesn't want Naomi digging through the security budget logs. And let's just say he knows a few pens at Civic Watch Daily." And when Shane said it, his eyes lit up, not with confidence, but with the cold clarity of a man who'd lost everything, and now knew exactly where to strike, to make others collapse. 3 days later, the article dropped. "Did new police chief cover up evidence in wrongful arrest case?" Bold headline. Front page of the notable figures section. One photo showed Naomi, mid-speech, holding her reform folder. Next to it, a black and white image of Marquis Lyle, with a red caption stamped over it. "Still no justice." At Briarfield, the hallways buzz again, not because of proven truth, but because well-timed doubt always hits the hardest. In his small office, Shane read the article line by line, savoring every sentence, like a sip of victory. "You might wear the badge, Naomi Ellison," he thought, "but I'm the one rewriting the rules." Only he didn't know, the one quietly gathering pieces of the real story was the very rookie he dismissed the most, Kyle Merritt. Monday morning, Naomi Ellison set her tea down on the desk, eyes locked on her screen. The article from Civic Watch Daily had spread like wildfire all weekend. Local TV stations were now saying her name. Online, the comment sections were split. Some stood by her. Others clung to every word in the article, asking if there was nothing to hide. Why was the Marquis Lau case never closed? She knew the case, knew it too well. It had cost her sleep more than once. Marquis Lau had been arrested during an anti-gang operation in 2011. The initial evidence was filed into temporary records, but by the time it reached her hands, it was gone. No solid ground for prosecution, no accountability for the loss. And now, that very case had become a knife, aimed at her integrity. Wesley Drummond stepped into her office, worry etched into every line of his face. I just heard 3 officers from the Rapid Response Unit are pulling out of SIT. Naomi nodded slightly, as if she'd already expected it. What reason did they give? Wesley hesitated. Unclear leadership direction, and concerns over growing instability within the department. Naomi leaned back in her chair, hands clasped. Instability, she echoed and gave a faint, tired smile. Understandable. All it takes is one article to spread fear, but to reform something broken, that takes blood and silence. That night, Naomi came home late. Her second-floor apartment at Wexley Gardens was still and dim. The amber glow of the street lamp spilled across the windows. She hung her coat, removed her gun belt, sank into the worn sofa that had once belonged to Camille Reddick. She turned on the radio. A slow jazz track crackled to life, a rare breath of peace. That lasted exactly 4 minutes. Click. A faint sound from the kitchen. Naomi froze. She reached under the couch cushion. Her fingers closed around her Glock 19. She moved slowly. The kitchen window, locked this morning, was now slightly ajar. No signs of forced entry. No tripped alarms. But on the wooden table was a photo, old, worn. Naomi as a child, standing beside Camille Reddick, at a Justice March in 1989. On the back, scribbled in pencil, "Don't forget what you left behind." Naomi clutched the photo. No panic, no phone call, just one breathless second, when the threat didn't need to scream. It only had to touch a memory. The next morning, she walked into headquarters. No smiles now, no greetings like in the first week. Some officers looked away. Others whispered as she passed. Even Brady Kernell, once neutral, now avoided her eyes. Naomi said nothing. She walked straight into her office, closed the door, sat still in the dim light. Wesley came in moments later, his face heavy. "You can't face this alone," he said quietly. Naomi's voice was light, almost soft. "Who said I'm alone? There's just no one willing to stand beside me yet." Wesley looked at her, wanted to say more, but saying nothing, because he knew loneliness is the price every pioneer pays. Outside that office, Shane Kershaw sat at his desk, feet propped on the drawer, chewing peppermint candy, staring at Naomi's frosted window. He smiled, not because he believed he had won, but because he believed she was beginning to lose ground, one step at a time. In the fall, the halls of Briarfield Police Division usually smelled of burnt coffee, ink, and sawdust. But now, the air reeked of suspicion. Since the smear article and the strange break-in at Naomi's apartment, everything felt heavier, like everyone was bracing for something to fall apart. And among all those who stayed silent, Kyle Merritt was the only one who wasn't sleeping anymore. This young rookie used to believe his job was simple: follow orders, survive the first few years, climb the ranks, slowly, quietly. But after what happened to Naomi, the coffee thrown in her face, the smear article, and that vacant look in her eyes the morning after someone broke into her home, Kyle understood something he hadn't before. If he stayed silent, he wasn't just a bystander. He was part of the problem. That afternoon, as the clock hit 5:47, Kyle made his way down to the basement archives of the Briarfield Police Division. Down there, the air was colder, the walls stained with time. It felt more like a graveyard of forgotten cases than a filing room. No one liked going down there. No one asked questions if someone did. He carried an old briefcase, a clip-on flashlight on his chest, and a kind of courage he'd never felt before. He began scanning through the digital record backups, specifically from 2009 to 2016, the years when Shane Kershaw had been a sergeant on the city patrol unit, and Donovan Pike had chaired the State Homeland Security Committee. Nearly 2 hours, and Kyle stopped on a file labeled Project 32A Non-Priority Surveillance. It was a blurry scan, stamped in red. Insufficient for prosecution. Do not escalate. But the names inside, they made Kyle break into a cold sweat. Shane Kershaw, Commanding Officer, Inner City Patrol Unit. Brady Kernell, Approval Officer on Suppression of Critical Evidence. Donovan Pike, Signatory on Emergency Budget Reallocation for Internal Concerns. And one more name, familiar from a Marquis Lyle case in 2011. Witness redacted, any Naomi Ellison. Not the person who covered up the case, but the one who tried to reopen it, who pushed for a reinvestigation. Before the evidence was wiped from the system, Kyle sank to the cold concrete floor. All these years, the truth had been here, buried under dust and data codes. Naomi hadn't hidden anything. She'd tried to fight back, and the system had silenced her. The next morning, Naomi walked into her office, eyes shadowed from another sleepless night. She had just settled into her chair when the door creaked open. Kyle Merritt stood there, a file folder clutched tightly to his chest, his face taut like a stretched wire. "Ma'am," he said, hesitating, "I think you should see this." Naomi took the folder, flipped through the pages. Donovan Pike's name, Brady Kernell's notes, Shane Kershaw's digital signature, and on the final page, a scanned internal email between Pike and an unnamed reporter. The subject line, Image Management Strategy, any return to force. Naomi's eyes stayed locked on the document. "Where did you get this?" she asked calmly. "Basement archives," Kyle replied. The system hadn't deleted the original file, but after the article went out, I figured someone would come back for it soon. Naomi looked up at him. "Do you understand what you're risking?" Kyle nodded. "I do, but if I stay quiet, then I'm no different than Brady." A long pause. Naomi stood up and gently placed a hand on Kyle's shoulder. "Thank you," she said quietly. "You just reignited the flame I was about to let die." The moment Kyle left her office, Wesley Drummond rushed in, face pale. "What is it?" Naomi asked. Wesley held up his phone. On the screen, a grainy photo of Kyle walking out her office, posted on the encrypted internal message board. One caption, "Handle it." Naomi froze. No explanation needed. Someone knew. Kyle had gone too far. "We're out of time," she said, her voice like steel. "Tonight, I want the trusted circle assembled. We strike back." That evening, tension in the Briarfield Police Division hung like thunder before a storm. Everyone knew something was coming. No one knew it would change everything. Forever. At 4 p.m. sharp, the elevator doors opened on the 3rd floor. Naomi Ellison stepped out, dressed in a sharply pressed police uniform, the chief's badge gleaming under the ceiling lights. Behind her, Wesley Drummond, and Kyle Merritt, gripping a locked briefcase like his life depended on it. Inside that case, documents powerful enough to destroy careers and expose the truth. They entered the city's main press conference room, hastily rebuilt in just 18 hours. New podium, fresh signage, and the Channel 8 Southeastern Dispatch cameras already rolling for a live broadcast. The room was packed. Reporters swarmed like bees, microphones raised like spears. The names Donovan Pike and Shane Kershaw, once footnotes in weekend bulletins, had now become headline gold. Naomi stepped up to the podium. She didn't speak right away. She looked around the room, at the harsh floodlights, at the cameras tracking her every move in slow, deliberate focus. Then she spoke. "This past week, I've been asked the same question over and over again. Do you have proof that you're innocent?" She opened the briefcase, pulled out a thick stack of documents, dropped it hard onto the table. "I'm not here to prove my innocence. I'm here to expose the crimes of those who corrupted this system for decades." The room went dead silent. Then Naomi clicked to the presentation screen behind her, 3 bullet points. 1 budget fraud. 2015 forged financial records. Over $120,000 redirected with no trace. 2 suppress investigations. Internal emails between Shane Kershaw and Donovan Pike, showing deliberate obstruction of the Marquis Lyle case. 3 internal threats. Evidence uncovered by Kyle Merritt. A documented plan to manage the image of Annie in case she ever returned to the force. The room went silent, and when the audio started playing, every whisper of doubt shattered into hard truth. A reporter shouted, "Do you have real evidence?" Naomi raised her hand. Kyle clicked the next slide. An audio recording began. Shane Kershaw's voice. "Let them sign the damn forms. Where the money goes. Only me and Pike know that." Second voice. Undeniably Donovan Pike. "As long as HR doesn't dig to the archive room, no one will ever find out." The room exploded. Cameras swerved. Journalists looked at one another, stunned. Naomi continued, calm and clear. "This isn't just about budget fraud. We have proof of case manipulation, witness threats, and internal silencing. Officer Merritt," she nodded to Kyle, "found it all in archived records they thought were buried for good." Then Naomi turned to face the cameras. "And finally, to the people of the city, I didn't come here to clear my name. I came to reclaim the honor of a department poisoned by men like Shane Kershaw and Donovan Pike, who twisted it with fear, greed, and unchecked power." Silence. Then an eruption. Mics shook. Questions flew like bullets. But Naomi didn't answer. She said just one more thing. "Truth doesn't need to scream. It only needs someone brave enough to say it out loud. Today I did. Tomorrow, I hope more will rise." She stepped down from the podium. Kyle followed, still clutching the case, as if holding the very idea of justice in his arms. Wesley trailed behind, eyes glassy. "You gave justice its voice back," he whispered. But behind the curtains, someone else was watching. Shane Kershaw, his eyes cold, fixed, sharper than a blade. What stirred inside him wasn't fear. It was a final plan. 2 days later, Naomi's name was still trending. But now, so was Shane Kershaw's. Not as a cop, but as a target of a federal ethics investigation. Thanks to Kyle's evidence. Every document had been verified, time-stamped, cross-checked. The arrest warrant was signed within 36 hours. No sirens, no tactical teams. At exactly 10:12 a.m., 2 federal agents in dark shirts walked calmly into Briarfield Police Division. In their hands, a sealed yellow envelope. Inside, an arrest warrant for Shane Kershaw. Charges: corruption, abuse of power, obstruction of federal inquiry. In the duty room, Shane sipped coffee. Same mug, the one with the eagle print. The same mug he once threw in Naomi's face. This time, his hand trembled, just a little. The lead agent spoke, voice firm. "Shane Kershaw, you are under arrest pursuant to Title 18 of the United States Code for violations of civil rights and fraudulent misuse of public funds. Please stand." There are no exceptions. The entire precinct froze. Brady Kernell dropped his pen. Wesley Drummond stepped out of his office, face unreadable. Kyle Merritt stood nearby, silent, but no longer afraid. Shane let out a bitter laugh. "Me? Arrested here? In the very station I built brick by brick." He stood up and tapped the badge on his chest. "Do you people even know who I am? I handled over 100 cases. I kept this place from blowing up." Naomi appeared just then, holding a printed copy of the warrant. Her voice was calm. "No, Shane, you kept it rotting, while everyone was too scared to speak." Shane turned. For a second, his eyes went blank. "You think you've won?" Naomi didn't answer. She simply nodded. The 2 agents stepped forward and cuffed him, cold steel clicking shut around the wrists, of the man who once ruled Briarfield with a glance. As Shane was led down the main hallway, he tried to keep that swagger in his step, but in the eyes watching him, from seasoned officers to wide-eyed rookies, there was no fear left, only relief. Some bowed their heads, not out of regret, but because the shadow that had hung over them for years was finally leaving. Later that afternoon, during an internal meeting, Naomi stood before the team and spoke plainly. Today doesn't just mark the end of man. It marks the end of the style of leadership, one built on fear, false power, and control. I can't promise I won't make mistakes, but I promise this. No one under my watch will ever have to bow their head for justice again. In the corner of the room, Kyle Merritt sat quietly. His eyes met Naomi's, and he knew doing the right thing doesn't always need applause. Sometimes it just needs someone willing to go first. In Briarfield, the old order had collapsed, and for the first time in years, justice was finally being called by its name. 3 weeks later, Briarfield felt like it had entered a new season, not just because of the weather, but because the air inside the precinct had shifted. It was lighter, more honest, and, strangely, hopeful. In the main briefing room, Naomi Ellison stood by a whiteboard. Wesley Drummond and Kyle Merritt stood beside her. The department-wide retraining program was entering its final phase. There had been tough questions, harsh resistance, plenty of wary glances. But what kept Naomi going was something quietly miraculous, a small change starting to take root in those who had once stayed silent. And then Brady Kernell, the man who once turned his back when she needed him most, stood up in a transparency session and offered the very first public apology. "I'm not proud of what I failed to do," he said, voice low, "but I hope there's still time to do what's right." That Saturday evening, in a packed community meeting hall, Mrs. Delphine Rook, who had once fiercely opposed Naomi, stood when a mic was passed to her. "I used to think Chief Ellison was just another political figure," she said, eyes brimming. "But now I know justice doesn't come from a title. It comes from how someone chooses to stand when no one else will." And perhaps the most surprising of all was Jeff, the officer who once secretly funneled information to Shane, was now asking to join the internal training team. "I betrayed because I was scared," he admitted to Naomi during a private meeting. "But I understand now. Fear isn't a free pass to abandon your conscience." Naomi didn't preach, didn't scold. She simply said, "We don't need people who've never made mistakes. We need people brave enough to make things right." By year's end, Briarfield held its first ever community open house, where residents could meet officers face-to-face, observe complaint review processes, and even sit on real discussions about night patrol policies. A 7-year-old boy drew a picture of police and citizens shaking hands and gave it to Naomi. His name was Malik. He lived in a neighborhood Shane once raided, just to flex authority. Naomi held the drawing and smiled. Behind her, through the glass pane, sunset spilled over rows of worn brick houses, and for the first time in years, she saw a future here. She turned to her team and said, "We weren't born to change the whole world, but if we can protect justice where we stand, the world will start to change from that very spot." And as Camille Reddick once said, justice doesn't arrive like thunder. It arrives in the hands of those brave enough to lay the first brick. Naomi laid that brick, and now all of Briarfield was rebuilding the foundation of trust with her. Naomi Ellison's story isn't just a battle between right and wrong. It's proof of something simpler, deeper. Justice doesn't come on its own. It needs someone willing to call it by name. There will be times when you're the only voice in a room full of silence, times when you must hold your ground while everything else shakes. But it's in those moments when your resolve, no matter how small, can spark change bigger than you imagined. Briarfield was once ruled by fear, by those who had truth behind titles and power. But it only took one person willing to stand first, for the rest to start following. So if there's one thing you carry from this story, let it be this: never underestimate the power of a single right act, even if it's quiet, even if it's alone, because sometimes you are the last light left in the dark room. If this story moved you, share it with someone who needs to believe in justice again. And don't forget to subscribe to Mr. 7 Stories so you won't miss the next journey. Because who knows, the next story might be exactly what your heart needs to hear. Thank you for staying until the very end. Wishing you a peaceful and hopeful day.